So I have an important update in the Bianchi, Maryland assault weapon ban case, which is now up for Supreme Court review, and it's asking for the Supreme Court to step in immediately and put an end to all these rifle bans. So let's talk about what just happened. Now, real quick, before we jump into the video, I actually want to do something a little bit more personal. I want to ask you guys for a quick favor. One of the things that I'm now doing is I'm doing a podcast with a couple of my buddies who are also YouTubers, Jared from Guns and Gadgets, and then also Johnny B. We have a podcast that's releasing every single week, and it's under the name Liberty Lounge. You can find links to it on YouTube, all the audio platforms. I will link those all down below. Now, another thing I'm going to try to do is I'm interested in maybe doing some live streams. I'm probably going to be doing them on different platforms over on Twitch and Kick. Some of the things we're going to probably be doing over there on those live streams is showing you guys some of the gear, equipment, firearms, and things that I have that I'm interested in, and having some different types of conversations over on the streams, which are a little bit more lenient on what you can show and say. So again, if you want to support me on some of these other ventures that I'm doing, I will leave links to those down below where you can follow. As I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be talking about a critical rifle ban case that is now up for Supreme Court review. You may recall that the Second Amendment Foundation, also known as SAF, recently filed for a writ of cert before judgment, and that went to the United States Supreme Court. And that case all involves whether or not Maryland's ban on so-called assault weapons is in fact constitutional or not. The case that we're going to be covering and talking about is the Bianchi v. Brown case. This case now sets the stage for a critical Supreme Court review of a state rifle ban that can be broad-reaching and have huge implications for all kinds of states like California, New York, New Jersey, and other states as well who put in place these types of rifle bans. And really all this comes on the heels of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals recently playing a ton of games, playing shenanigans, and taking the Bianchi case out of the hands of the three-judge panel lower court and essentially putting that case on hold for 13 months and then suddenly saying, no, we're going to take this case. We don't want you to issue a favorable decision. We're going to take that from the three-judge panel. We're going to take this en banc, set it for oral arguments, and pretty much try to avoid anything positive happening as far as striking down a rifle ban. Now, in response, SAF decided to not wait for the Fourth Circuit en banc panel to stall the case or, cause any more issues. Instead, they decided to go directly up to the United States Supreme Court, and they filed for a writ of cert before judgment. And they wanted to get this case in the hands of the Supreme Court immediately. But as we all anticipated, the state of Maryland continues to delay, and they have received an extension from the United States Supreme Court because they have decided suddenly to move a little bit faster on this case to hear the case en banc for oral arguments in the Fourth Circuit, and that's going to happen this, month, March 20th, so just next month. This is another tactic by the Fourth Circuit to essentially prevent immediate Supreme Court intervention in this case and to pretty much avoid the Supreme Court stepping in right here and now. Now, for some quick background on this case and now, kind of this interplay between the Supreme Court's intervention and the current Fourth Circuit en banc panel's delays and now all of a sudden starting this case up, we kind of need to talk about what happened prior to this case and some of the legal precedent that has been set in the Fourth Circuit. The state of Maryland identifies certain rifles as so-called assault weapons. Maryland bans the sale, transfer, or possession of semi-automatic centerfire rifles that have detachable magazines and two offending features like a folding stock, a grenade launcher, a flash suppressor, and other items and other characteristics. This ban was challenged in a Maryland district court and a federal district court, and in the complaint, the plaintiffs had to concede that their Second Amendment claims were foreclosed at that time at the district court level because of a prior Fourth Circuit decision on this very issue. That prior case that essentially led to this concession was the Colby case, and that was the Colby challenge against the Maryland ban on so-called assault weapons. In the prior Colby case, a district court upheld the Maryland ban using something known as intermediate scrutiny. It's a form of legal analysis. On review, a divided panel in the Fourth Circuit concluded that these rifles are protected by the Second Amendment and that the ban substantially burdens the right of self-defense within the home. On that basis, they struck down the ban using strict scrutiny, a different tier of scrutiny. It's not intermediate scrutiny, it's the type of scrutiny that sits above that. Well, the state of Maryland didn't like that, so they sought en banc review, a rehearing in the Fourth Circuit. On review, that en banc panel in the Fourth Circuit upheld the state of Maryland's ban, finding that rifles are outside the protection of the Second Amendment because they said they are useful in military service. And since they are useful in military service, they said that states like Maryland could ban them or restrict them. So that was the Colby case that currently stands as precedent in the Fourth Circuit and is kind of set that precedent, and that's what some of these courts have to currently follow unless that's overturned, which in some ways it has been, and really in my opinion has been under Bruen. This case, Bianchi had to concede that Colby was the controlling precedent at that time, And essentially, they had to argue that although that's precedent, it's incorrect and should be reversed. Now, when the Bianchi case was first brought in the district court ultimately had to dismiss the complaint because they said there was a failure to state a claim. That dismissal was then appealed up to the Fourth Circuit, and the Fourth Circuit three-judge panel once again had to uphold that dismissal. Now, after that, this case then went up to the United States Supreme Court on a cert on review, and that was back in 2022. Now, as we all are aware, recently the Supreme Court ultimately ruled in a landmark Second Amendment case known as New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen. And in that decision, the court found, among many things, is they ruled that the correct way to review Second Amendment cases is to look at the text of the Second Amendment in light of relevant history and tradition. They expressly rejected tiered-based scrutiny and expressly also rejected intermediate scrutiny being used in Second Amendment cases. They also said that the relevant history is history that dates back to 1791. Now, after issuing the Bruen ruling, the Supreme Court issued a GVR in the Bianchi v. Frosch case, in the Bianchi v. Brown case. A GVR is a grant, vacate, and remand. Essentially, the court granted review of the Bianchi case, vacated the prior judgment of the lower courts, and then remanded the case back down to the Fourth Circuit for reconsideration in light of Bruen. That reconsideration requires that the case be reheard using text as informed by relevant history and tradition. This case was then opened back up in the Fourth Circuit, and the Fourth Circuit three-judge panel held oral arguments in this case, back, I believe, at December of 2022. And after the oral arguments back in December of 2022, this case then sat dormant for about 13 to 14 months. And then we received an order from the Fourth Circuit en banc panel, and that order stated that a majority of the judges in regular active service and not disqualified having voted in a requested poll of the court to grant rehearing en banc, it is ordered that rehearing en banc is granted. Now, that was not good because the Fourth Circuit decided to strip the case out of the hands of the three-judge panel that was likely going to issue a favorable decision. And that's also likely why the case sat dormant for 13 months, because the Fourth Circuit en banc panel was preventing the three-judge panel from issuing their decision. So again, that was not great news, but the awesome team over at SAF, Adam, Kraut, Bill, Sack, Lauren Hill, all those amazing people that I worked with also at FPC, and then also in conjunction with FPC, they have sought a writ of cert before judgment. So they are now going immediately up to the Supreme Court saying, hey, the Fourth Circuit en banc panel, they continue to play shenanigans. They're not following your Bruen decision. Therefore, Supreme Court, you need to step in and immediately review this case. This is essentially a way to bypass hearings and rulings of lower courts and instead go directly to SCOTUS for an actual ruling on the merits of the case. Now, what is intriguing about this case is the fact that Bianchi was already GVR'd by the Supreme Court prior after Bruen, and also the fact that the Fourth Circuit had sat on this case for 13 plus months and decided to not adhere to Bruen and decided not to actually do anything about this case even after it was remanded. Now, the interesting thing about this cert before judgment is that Maryland's response day was essentially pushed back a month. Maryland was set to have to file their response to the Supreme Court in this writ of cert before judgment by March 13th, which is in just a couple days. But what they ultimately decided to do was ask for an extension from the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court granted the extension and pushed it out a month. The state of Maryland will now get to file the response by April 12th. Now, why are we talking about that? Why is this relevant? Well, it's relevant because what the Fourth Circuit en banc panel is currently doing is they're deciding to finally move on this case, and they're holding oral arguments in this case on March 20th. So next week, they're going to have oral arguments in this Bianchi case at the Fourth Circuit en banc panel level. That's right. Now, after 14 or 15 months after this case sat dormant after the last oral arguments, now the Fourth Circuit en banc panel is going to hold their own oral arguments in this case, and they're going to review this issue. Now, why this is important is likely because what will now happen in the state's response that they get to file in April. Essentially, what they're likely going to argue in the response is that the writ of cert before judgment is not needed. The state of Maryland will argue that the Fourth Circuit has held oral arguments in this case on March 20th, and they're currently set to issue their decision. And since the Fourth Circuit en banc panel has already heard arguments in this case, they're going to argue that the Supreme Court should deny review in this case and simply just wait until the Fourth Circuit rules in the case. And I think it's very likely that the Supreme Court will agree and deny a writ of cert before judgment because the Fourth Circuit decided to move on this case. The en banc panel heard oral arguments in this case. They're going to hear oral arguments in this case next week. And I think because of that, the Supreme Court will say, hey, we're not going to step in right now. Let's see what the Fourth Circuit en banc panel rules. And then you can file a traditional writ to us. And then at that time, we will decide if we want to grant review or not. So not the best developments, but still there's a lot of hope for this case. Of course, if anything else develops, if anything else happens, I will let you guys know. And of course, we will also be listening to those oral arguments in the Fourth Circuit in this Bianchi case, which are going to happen on March 20th. And I'll make sure to share that link around if you guys want to listen to that as well. So again, if you have any questions, go ahead and comment down below and I will try to answer to the best of my ability. Also, if you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm, and it signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos and in this type of two-way news. But as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.